Hey everyone, Tin Man here, and at the highest ranks, one build has become quite dominant in the current Dota Underlords meta. Void Hunters have taken over as the premier composition, and in this guide we will cover why this build has been so dominant, talk about the core units to the build, ideal items and Underlord choices, as well as go over some positioning tips. So why did this build suddenly take over the meta? Well, it absolutely dominates the late game thanks to the incredible damage output provided by the Void Alliance, combined with the fast attack speed of Hunters. Now, that has always been the case since Season 1 released, but it has often been overshadowed by the Savage build, which has of course been recently nerfed. But now, thanks to the recent buff to the Vigilant Alliance, this build also has a fairly strong mid-game, built around Heartless and Vigilant until Void units come online. This means that the build is very strong at all points in the game. It is not weak in the early and mid-game like a lot of other late-game focused builds typically are. This build has a strong compositional counter to any type of tanky opposing builds. Knights, warriors, and brawny units will get absolutely shredded by the high pure damage output of the Void Alliance. And even if your opponents manage to get 3-star units, this build can still take them down with ease thanks to the percentage max health scaling on Void. And finally, it's also just really hard to build any kind of build to counter this once it gets everything together. You can't build tanks, you can't really build the 3-star units, and this build just has far more damage output than other damage-focused builds, so building a compositional counter to beat Void Hunters is just very difficult. Let's talk about some of the core units to the build. Drow Ranger, Wind Ranger, and Mirana, these three hunters share the obvious synergy with their Vigilant Alliance, which adds quite a bit of damage to your board with the additional 50% bonus on the first attack against a target who just cast a spell. They also have fast attack speeds, and when placed properly around the Drow Ranger, her precision aura buffs up their attack speed even more. Now, what better way to take advantage of the fast attack speed than with the Void Alliance, which will have that chance to deal bonus damage on every single attack. This alliance is highly impactful and should be completed as soon as possible, even if you are still using several 1-star units. These almost core units, Medusa and Faceless Void, are two tier 5 units that are great options for the build and should be put in as soon as you can find them, even at 1 star. I don't like to put tier 5 units in the core unit section since they are unreliable to find, and you should not plan your entire build around finding one. But when you do get them, they're going to be great additions. Faceless Void is a direct replacement for Enigma, while Medusa is best as an additional hunter on top of the 3 Vigilant Hunters mentioned before. Each of her split shots can trigger the Void Alliance, making her insanely powerful with this build. In addition to Hunters and Voids, the Heartless Alliance can also dramatically increase your damage output. Units like Pudge and Abaddon also have the ability to frontline quite well, even without their Warrior or Knights Alliance completed. This build will almost always want the 4 Heartless Alliance in the early and mid game, but it can be cut down to just 2 if you need the space for the Void Alliance come the late game. Luna is an alternative Vigilant and can be very strong in the early and mid game. She also gives the Knight Alliance along with Abaddon, but that's fairly low impact. By the late game though, it's better to replace her with one of the other Vigilant units if possible, unless you manage to get her up to 3 stars of course. Sometimes you just need a big tank in front to buy time for your hunters. In those cases, Tidehunter is the pick. There are some cases where you will want the Warrior Alliance in this build along with Pudge, or the scaled buff with Medusa, but a 2-star Tidehunter is just always going to be a welcome addition to this build thanks to his Ravage, regardless of whether or not he completes any alliances. Let's move on to some of the items. Moonshard and Mask of Madness. Attack speed is just king in this build. You'll have plenty of damage output from the Void Alliance. You just need to make sure that your units can attack as many times as possible in order to trigger it. To this end, it's much better to get attack speed items like Moonshard and Mask of Madness to put onto your hunters compared to more damage-based items like Crystallis or Maelstrom. Barricade. Almost all of the damage from this build will come from your hunters who have long attack ranges and don't mind being boxed in up around the Drow Ranger for her precision aura. Barricade is a great option to prevent opposing units from just walking up and hitting your vulnerable hunters, and it also buys them a ton of time against opposing spells as well. Vesture of the Tyrant. The default positioning here, of course, will be stacking up around the Drow Ranger, so Vesture of the Tyrant is a great option to give your units a few extra seconds from beyond the grave. Those few seconds are actually hugely impactful given how much damage each unit does in the late game. This item can easily help to turn fights in your favor. Tombstone. Now, one of the weaknesses of this build is the relative lack of frontline units and alliances. Only typically Pudge and Abaddon are dedicated tanks. Tombstone can help to bolster your front line by not only spawning additional zombies, but also just having a fairly large health pool itself. Every second that you can buy for your Void buffed hunters is a ton of damage output, so contraptions like this and Target Buddy are great for this style of build. In terms of Underlord choice, damage support on Essex is definitely the best Underlord choice for this build. Her End of Medicine ability is great when most of your damage output is coming from auto attacks, especially in the early and mid game. But the real appeal is the very potent Enthrall ability. Since this build is predicated on single target focused damage thanks to the Vigilant Alliance, it is very easy to quickly kill off any enthralled target. This returns them to fight on your side, which is just a huge swing in any fight. Otherwise, support damage dealer Hobgen is a good option, since his Let's Go Crazy ultimate will grant a strong attack speed buff to your whole team. This is amazing when paired up with the Void Alliance, but it does take a while for this ability to really pay off in a fight, compared to the near instant payoff of Enthrall. He's also weaker until you get that Void Alliance online. If neither of those options are available, Aggressive Tank Jull is also acceptable, since this build tends to lack some frontline. Barrels of Fun is a strong ultimate with all of the ranged hunters, who will likely get a strong attack speed boost, and it also deals physical damage, which is amplified by the Heartless Alliance. On to some positioning tips. First, you want to stack your ranged units around a Drow Ranger. Her Precision Aura is a huge boost to nearby allies. You also want to corner your ranged units behind a barricade if you have one. Barricades provide a strong defense against melee attackers and spells, and also funnels your opponents towards your melee units. You want to ensure that Mirana is in a corner to bait out opposing pudge hooks. She'll be able to leap away to safety, while other units would be quickly eliminated. And also, place Enigma up near the front to quickly gain mana to cast his ability. He has a very slow attack speed and will struggle to gain mana unless he's being hit by enemies, so you definitely want to put him up front in order to ensure that he casts on time. Here's an example positioning with all of these factors at work. We have the 3 barricades in front of our ranged units, protecting them from attackers. Melee opponents will be funneled to the Enigma and Pudge to get them mana quickly. The hunters are stacked up around Drow Ranger so that all ranged units are adjacent to her aura. Notice that Mirana is, of course, in the corner, so that if an opponent has Pudge, she will be hooked rather than the more vulnerable hunters or the Essex. That does it for this guide. I strongly believe that this is the strongest build in the meta right now. Despite all of the talk about Bloodseeker, this build is really what you should be trying for if possible. If anyone has any ideas on how to counter it, I am all ears. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you do like this type of content and want to help me continue making it, please consider joining the channel. It really does help me out a lot, and you get awesome perks like early access to guides like this one to help stay one step ahead of the meta. Thank you so much to all of my channel members, and extra special thanks to my Lord tier members, John Vise and Abram Woodland. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.